The chain snapped with a metallic ping that echoed through the empty parking lot behind Miller's Diner. I stood there in the drizzling Portland rain, staring down at my 10-year-old mountain bike like it had personally betrayed me. The derailleur hung at an odd angle, and I could see that the rear wheel was wobbling worse than ever. This wasn't just another minor repair I could YouTube my way through with zip ties and prayer. Perfect timing, I muttered, pulling out my phone to check the time. 11:47 p.m. My shift at the diner had run late because someone had to cover for Marcus, who'd called in sick again, and now I was stranded 3 miles from my apartment with no way to get home except walking, in the rain, at midnight. I'd been riding this bike since I was 15, when I'd saved up enough from my first job at the local ice cream shop to buy it used from a guy on Craigslist. Back then, it had been my ticket to freedom, a way to get to work, to school, to anywhere I needed to be, without having to ask my parents for rides that came with lectures about responsibility and gratitude. Now, at 25, it was still my only reliable transportation. My Honda Civic had died 2 years ago, and I'd never been able to save enough for another car between community college tuition, rent, and helping my grandmother with her medical bills. The bike had been my lifeline, getting me between my 2 jobs and my classes at Portland Community College. I tried to lift the bike, but the chain caught in the spokes, and the whole thing made a grinding sound that told me this wasn't going to be a quick fix. The rain was picking up, soaking through my diner uniform and making my blonde hair stick to my face in wet strands. I needed to get home, shower, and get at least 5 hours of sleep before my morning shift at the campus bookstore. After an awkward 20-minute walk pushing the broken bike, I finally made it to my studio apartment in Southeast Portland. The building was old, the walls thin, and the heating inconsistent, but it was mine. I'd been so proud when I'd signed the lease 2 years ago, even though it meant working 2 jobs to make rent. It had felt like proof that I was making it on my own, that I didn't need to depend on anyone. I propped the bike against the wall in my tiny kitchen and examined it under the harsh fluorescent light. The damage was worse than I'd thought. The derailleur was bent, the chain was stretched beyond repair, and the rear wheel needed to be completely trued. I pulled up the website for Mike's Bike Shop on Division Street and found their repair estimate form. After entering all the problems, the estimate came back at $180 for parts and labor. My stomach dropped. I had exactly $47 in my checking account, and that had to last until my next paycheck on Friday. Even then, after rent and utilities, I usually had maybe $100 left over for food and emergencies. This definitely qualified as an emergency, but it was an emergency I couldn't afford. I sat on my couch, a futon I'd bought at a thrift store, and stared at the bike. Without it, I'd have to take the bus to both jobs, which would add at least an hour to my commute each way and cost money I didn't have for bus fare. I could try to walk, but the campus bookstore was 4 miles away, and the diner was in the opposite direction. I'd spend half my day just getting to and from work. For the first time in years, I found myself considering something I'd sworn I wouldn't do, asking my parents for help. The thought made my chest tighten. My relationship with my parents had been strained since I'd moved out at 19. They'd wanted me to stay home, go to a 4-year university on their dime, and follow the path they'd laid out for me. When I'd chosen to work and pay my own way through community college instead, they'd acted like I was throwing my life away. Meanwhile, my younger brother Jake had gotten everything handed to him. When he'd graduated high school last year, they'd bought him a brand new Honda Civic, the same model as my old car that had died. They'd paid for his first year at Portland State University, covering tuition, room, and board. They'd even given him a credit card for emergencies that seemed to include a lot of coffee dates and new video games. I'd been working since I was 14, first at that ice cream shop, then at a grocery store, then the diner and bookstore. I'd never asked them for anything, had never expected anything. But now, sitting in my cold apartment at 1 a.m., looking at my broken bike and my empty bank account, I realized I might not have a choice. I picked up my phone and stared at my mother's contact information. It was too late to call now, but maybe tomorrow I could swallow my pride and ask for help with the repair bill. It was only $180. For them, that was less than what they'd spent on Jake's textbooks last semester. The rain pattered against my single window, and I could hear my upstairs neighbor's TV through the thin walls. I thought about Jake in his dorm room, probably playing video games or out with friends, not worried about how he'd get to class tomorrow or whether he could afford to eat lunch. I thought about the way my parents' faces lit up when they talked about his achievements, his future, his potential. When had I become the afterthought? When had I stopped mattering? I'd find out tomorrow when I made that phone call. But as I lay down on my futon, still wearing my damp uniform because I was too tired to change, I had a sinking feeling that I already knew what their answer would be. The bike sat in my kitchen like a broken promise, and I fell asleep to the sound of rain against my window, dreading the conversation I'd have to have in the morning. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to my phone alarm, my neck stiff from sleeping on the futon in my work clothes. The bike was still there in my kitchen, looking even more pathetic in the gray morning light filtering through my single window. I had 2 hours before my shift at the campus bookstore, which meant I had 2 hours to figure out how I was going to get there. After a quick shower and a cup of instant coffee, I sat on my futon and stared at my phone. The rational part of my brain kept telling me this was reasonable. Asking your parents for help with a genuine emergency was normal. The part of my brain that had lived through 25 years of being overlooked kept whispering that this was a mistake. I dialed my mother's number before I could lose my nerve. "Nicole?" My mother's voice was surprised. I rarely called, especially not this early. "Is everything okay?" "Hi, Mom. Yeah, I'm fine. I need to ask you something." I took a deep breath. My bike broke down last night after work, and I got a repair estimate this morning. It's going to cost about $180 to fix, and I don't have that right now. I was wondering if you could help me out. Maybe loan me the money? I can pay you back in installments. There was a pause, and I could hear my father's voice in the background asking what was wrong. "Your bike?" My mother's tone had shifted from concern to something that sounded almost amused. "Nicole, you're 25 years old. Don't you think it's time you got a real car instead of riding around on that toy?" The word toy hit me like a slap. I'd ridden that toy to work every day for 3 years. It had gotten me through rain, snow, and summer heat. It had been my independence, my reliability, my way of not having to ask anyone for anything. "Mom, it's not a toy. It's my transportation. Without it, I can't get to work or school. I just need help with the repair cost." I heard her cover the phone and have a muffled conversation with my father. When she came back on the line, her voice had that patronizing tone I remembered from my teenage years. "Nicole, your father and I think this might be a good wake-up call for you. Maybe if you'd made better choices about your education and career path, you wouldn't be in this situation. We've offered to help you with college multiple times, and you've always refused." I didn't refuse help with college. I chose to pay my own way through community college instead of taking money for a 4-year degree I wasn't sure I wanted. And look where that's gotten you. My father's voice came through the phone. My mother must have put me on speaker. 25 years old, working 2 minimum wage jobs, and you can't even afford to fix a bicycle. Meanwhile, your brother is excelling at PSU, maintaining a 3.8 GPA, and he's already got internship opportunities lined up for next summer. The comparison to Jake was like a knife twist I should have seen coming. It was always about Jake and his achievements, his potential, his bright future. Never mind that I'd been working and supporting myself since I was 19, or that I'd maintained a 3.6 GPA while working 2 jobs. "This isn't about Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not asking you to pay for my life. I'm asking for help with a one-time emergency. I'll pay you back." "Nicole, sweetie." My mother's voice took on that fake sweet tone that meant she was about to say something hurtful. "Maybe this is exactly what you need to motivate yourself to make some real changes. You can't depend on a bicycle forever. You need to grow up and figure out how to afford adult transportation." I heard my father chuckle in the background. Actually chuckle. Like my predicament was some kind of joke. "Adult transportation?" I repeated. "Like the brand new Honda Civic you bought Jake for his 18th birthday?" The silence stretched for a long moment. "That's completely different," my mother said finally. "Jake is focused on his education. He's working toward a real future. We're investing in his success. And I'm not successful? I'm working 2 jobs while going to school. I've never asked you for money. I pay my own rent, my own bills. You're working at a diner and a bookstore," my father interrupted. "That's not a career, Nicole. That's what people do when they don't have real goals." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so proud of my independence, of making it on my own, of proving that I could handle adult responsibilities. But to them, everything I'd worked for was just nothing. "So you won't help me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We think you need to figure this out on your own," my mother said. "Maybe call that boss of yours at the diner and ask for more hours. Or finally admit that your current path isn't working and come home. We'd be happy to help you apply for spring admission to a real university. Come home, back to their rules, their expectations, their constant comparisons to Jake. Back to being the disappointment daughter who couldn't make the right choices." "I have to go," I said. "I need to get to work." "Nicole, don't be dramatic. We're just trying to help you see." I hung up. I sat on my futon for 10 minutes, staring at my phone, waiting for the anger to overtake the hurt. But the hurt was too deep, too familiar. This was exactly what I'd expected, and that made it somehow worse. I'd known they'd say no, known they'd make it about my life choices, known they'd compare me to Jake, but I'd called anyway, and now I felt like an idiot for hoping things might be different. I looked at my bike, then at my phone, then at the clock. I had an hour and a half to get to work, and it was a 4-mile walk. I grabbed my backpack, my campus bookstore name tag, and my rain jacket. Portland in November was not kind to pedestrians, but I didn't have a choice. As I locked my apartment door, I could hear my neighbor Mrs. Chen in the hallway, struggling with her groceries. She was probably in her 70s, and I'd helped her carry things upstairs a few times before. "Need some help, Mrs. Chen?" I asked, despite the fact that I was about to be late for work. "Oh, Nicole, you're so sweet. Just these 2 bags, if you don't mind." I carried her groceries up to her apartment, and she insisted on giving me a thermos of hot tea for my walk. "You take care of yourself, dear. You're such a good girl." A good girl. When was the last time my parents had said something that simple and kind to me? I stepped out into the drizzle and started walking toward campus, sipping Mrs. Chen's tea and thinking about the conversation I'd just had. My parents had made their position clear. I was on my own, and I was on my own because I'd chosen to be. They saw my independence as stubbornness, my hard work as evidence of poor planning, my life as a cautionary tale. But as I walked through the neighborhoods of Southeast Portland, past the coffee shops and food trucks and people starting their days, I realized something. Maybe being on my own wasn't the worst thing in the world. Maybe the family I'd been trying so hard to stay connected to had never really been my family at all. I had 4 miles to walk and a lot to think about. I arrived at the campus bookstore 20 minutes late, soaked from the rain and exhausted from the 4-mile walk. My manager, Sarah, looked up from the register with concern rather than annoyance. "Nick, you look like you've been through a hurricane. What happened?" Sarah was only a few years older than me, but she'd been managing the bookstore for 3 years and had always been fair with scheduling and understanding about my other job. I'd never really talked to her about my personal life, but something about the morning I'd had made me want to be honest. "My bike broke down last night, and I can't afford to fix it right now," I said, hanging my wet jacket on the hook behind the counter. "I had to walk from Southeast Portland. 4 miles in this weather?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Nick, why didn't you call me? I would have picked you up." The simple kindness in her voice almost made me tear up. After the phone call with my parents, I'd forgotten that some people actually cared about helping others without strings attached. "I didn't want to bother you," I said, starting to straighten the textbook display that had been messed up by students the day before. "Don't be ridiculous. We're a team here." Sarah paused, then looked at me more carefully. "How much does it cost to fix your bike?" "About $180. I know it's a lot, but it's my only transportation. And without it, I can't get to my other job or—" "Wait," Sarah interrupted. "You have another job?" I nodded. "I work at Miller's Diner 4 nights a week. I need both jobs to make rent and pay for school." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Nick, I had no idea you were working so hard. And you're taking classes too?" "Just part-time at PCC. I'm working toward my associate degree in business." "That's amazing. I barely managed to get through college with just my part-time job here." Sarah leaned against the counter. "Look, I might have an idea about your bike situation. My boyfriend Marcus works at a bike shop downtown, and he owes me a favor. Let me call him and see if he can help." I stared at her, surprised. "You don't have to do that." "Of course I don't have to. I want to." She pulled out her phone. "Marcus? Hey, it's Sarah. I have a coworker who needs some bike repairs, and I was wondering if you could take a look." "Yeah, she's good people." "Okay, great." She hung up and turned back to me. "He says if you can get your bike to Downtown Bikes on Burnside, he'll take a look at it after work today. He might be able to work something out for you." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Sarah, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me drive you there after your shift. It's on my way home anyway." The day passed in a blur of helping students find textbooks and processing returns. During my lunch break, I called Miller's Diner to explain my situation to Tony, the manager. Like Sarah, he was more understanding than I'd expected. "Nick, you're one of my best servers," he said. "I'm not going to fire you because your bike broke down. Can you make it in tomorrow night?" "I think so. Sarah is helping me get it looked at this afternoon." "Good. And Nick? If you need someone to pick you up for your shift tomorrow, call me. I live in Southeast, too." 2 offers of help in one day. I was starting to realize that maybe I'd been so focused on proving my independence that I'd forgotten there was a difference between being independent and being alone. At 5 o'clock, Sarah drove me to Downtown Bikes. The shop was small and cluttered, with dozens of bikes hanging from the ceiling and parts scattered across workbenches. Marcus turned out to be a tall, lanky guy with grease-stained hands and a friendly smile. "So you're the one with the wounded bike," he said, looking at my mountain bike, which Sarah had helped me load into her car. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He examined the bike with the kind of attention I'd seen mechanics give to cars. After a few minutes, he looked up. "Good news and bad news. The good news is that this is a solid bike, and with some work, it'll run like new. The bad news is that it needs more than I initially thought." The derailleur, the chain, the cassette, and the rear wheel needs to be completely rebuilt. My heart sank. How much? For parts and labor? Probably around $220, even more than I'd estimated. I started to thank him for his time, but he held up a hand. But here's the thing. I've got a derailleur that came off a bike someone never picked up, and I can use a chain that's been sitting in my parts bin for months. The cassette I can clean up and reuse. If you're willing to learn, I can teach you how to true the wheel yourself. What would that cost? I asked, barely daring to hope. For parts and my time teaching you? Maybe $60, but you'd have to come in after we close and learn to do some of the work yourself. I looked at Sarah, who was grinning. That's incredible, I said to Marcus. But why would you do that? Marcus shrugged. Because I remember what it was like to be broke and need reliable transportation. And because Sarah says you're good people, and I trust her judgment. Plus, Sarah added, you'd learn a valuable skill. Next time something breaks, you'll be able to fix it yourself. I felt tears prick my eyes. These people, who barely knew me, were offering me exactly what I needed. Not charity, not pity, but genuine help with a path forward. When can we start? I asked. How about tomorrow after the shop closes? I'll order the parts tonight and they should be here by tomorrow afternoon. As Sarah drove me home, I thought about the difference between this afternoon and this morning's phone call. My parents had seen my broken bike as evidence of my poor life choices, something I needed to suffer through to learn a lesson. Sarah and Marcus saw it as a problem with a solution, something they could help me solve. Sarah, I said as she pulled up to my apartment building, thank you. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay me. Just pay it forward someday when you're in a position to help someone else. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking at my bike, but this time it didn't seem like a symbol of failure. It was going to be fixed, and I was going to learn how to fix it myself. I thought about calling my parents to tell them I'd found another way, but I realized I didn't want to. This wasn't about proving them wrong. This was about proving to myself that there were people in the world who would help without conditions, who saw problems as opportunities for community rather than individual failures. I made myself a simple dinner of pasta and canned sauce, and for the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Tomorrow, I'd learn to fix my bike. Tomorrow, I'd take another step toward being truly independent, not just financially, but emotionally too. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Have you thought about what we discussed? We're here if you want to make some changes. I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. I had all the help I needed. The next day felt different from the moment I woke up. Instead of dreading the walk to work, I was looking forward to the evening at Downtown Bikes. Sarah picked me up again, and I realized how much easier it was to accept help when it came without judgment or conditions. You seem lighter today, Sarah observed as we drove to campus. I feel lighter, I admitted. Yesterday morning, I felt so helpless, like I had no options. Now I feel like I'm actually moving forward. That's what community is supposed to do, Sarah said. We help each other move forward. Community. I'd never really thought about it that way before. Growing up, I'd been taught that asking for help was a sign of weakness, that independence meant never needing anyone. But maybe real independence meant building relationships with people who supported your growth rather than trying to survive completely alone. Work at the bookstore went smoothly, and around 4 o'clock, a student named Elena came in looking for a textbook for her evening business class. I'd helped her before. She was probably my age, working toward the same associate degree I was pursuing, and always friendly. How's your semester going? I asked as I rang up her purchase. Pretty good, though I'm stressed about the group project and marketing principles. My group keeps flaking on meetings. She paused. Hey, aren't you in Professor Martinez's Tuesday night section? I am. Are you thinking about switching to that class? Maybe. I heard he's really good, and the Tuesday time would work better with my work schedule. We talked for a few more minutes, and I found myself telling her about my bike situation and how I was learning to repair it that evening. Elena's face lit up. That's so cool. I've always wanted to learn basic bike maintenance. My bike isn't broken, but I have no idea how to do anything more complicated than pumping the tires. Without thinking, I said, you should come with me tonight. I bet Marcus wouldn't mind teaching 2 people instead of 1. Elena looked surprised but interested. Are you sure that would be okay? Let me text Sarah and ask. Sarah's response was immediate. The more the merrier. Marcus loves teaching bike repair. That evening, Sarah drove Elena and me to Downtown Bikes. Marcus was waiting with my bike up on a repair stand, the damaged parts laid out on a workbench like pieces of a puzzle. So we've got 2 students tonight, he said with a grin. Perfect. Elena, you can learn on Nick's bike, and then we'll check yours to make sure everything's running smoothly. For the next 3 hours, Marcus patiently taught us how to remove and install a derailleur, how to thread a new chain, and how to true a wheel using spoke tension. His hands were gentle and precise as he showed us each step, explaining not just how to do something but why it worked that way. "The thing about bikes," he said as Elena and I took turns adjusting spokes on my rear wheel, "is that they're actually pretty simple machines. Most problems have straightforward solutions. You just need to understand the system." "Unlike cars," Elena said, struggling slightly with the spoke wrench. "Exactly. With a bike, you can learn to fix almost anything yourself. It's empowering." Empowering. That was exactly the word for how I felt as I watched my bike transform from a broken mess back into reliable transportation. Every adjustment we made, every part we installed, was something I was learning to do myself. The next time something broke, I wouldn't be helpless. "You're a natural at this," Marcus told me as I successfully adjusted the derailleur tension. "Have you ever thought about working in a bike shop?" I looked up from the bike, surprised. "I've never really thought about it. I mean, I love bikes, but I didn't know it could be a real job." "Are you kidding? Good bike mechanics are always in demand, especially in Portland. And if you're interested in business, there's tons of opportunity in the cycling industry, shop management, sales, even starting your own mobile repair service." Elena looked up from where she was learning to check brake pad alignment. "That would be amazing. Like, imagine being your own boss, helping people with their transportation, doing something you actually enjoy." The idea planted itself in my mind like a seed. I'd been so focused on getting through community college and finding some generic office job that I'd never really thought about what I wanted to do. But standing in that bike shop, learning to fix something with my own hands, creating a solution instead of just surviving a problem, it felt right in a way that nothing had in a long time. "How would someone get started in bike mechanics?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Well, there are formal programs at some community colleges," Marcus said. "But honestly, the best way is to just start learning. Come in here once a week, help out with repairs, ask questions. After a few months, you'd know enough to work part-time at a shop. After a year, you'd be ready for full-time work. And the pay? Starting out, maybe $15 an hour. But experienced mechanics can make $25 an hour or more, especially if they specialize in high-end bikes or electric bikes. And if you're entrepreneurial, the sky's the limit. $25 an hour. That was more than I made at both my current jobs combined. And it was work that actually meant something, helping people stay mobile, keeping them connected to their communities. By 9 o'clock, my bike was completely rebuilt. Marcus had me test ride it around the block, and it rode smoother than it had in years. The total cost for parts came to exactly $50, less than he'd estimated. "This is incredible," I said, running my hand along the newly installed chain. "I can't believe how different it feels." "That's what happens when you fix things properly instead of just patching them up," Marcus said. "And now you know how to maintain it yourself." Elena was practically bouncing with excitement. "Nick, we should definitely do this again. Maybe we could learn how to build a bike from scratch." "Actually," Marcus said, "I've been thinking about offering a basic bike maintenance class once a week. If you two are interested and we can find a few more people, we could make it a regular thing." "I'm absolutely interested," I said immediately. "Me too," Elena agreed. "And I bet I could find other people from school who'd want to learn." As Sarah drove us home, Elena and I were already making plans. She was going to switch to Professor Martinez's Tuesday class so we could study together, and we were both going to come back to Marcus's shop next week to learn more bike repair skills. "You know what's funny?" Elena said as Sarah dropped her off at her apartment. "I came to buy a textbook today, and I ended up finding a study partner and learning a new skill. Sometimes the best things happen when you're not expecting them." When we got to my building, Sarah walked me to the door. "You seem like a different person than you were yesterday morning," she said. "I feel like a different person. Yesterday I felt trapped and helpless. Today I feel like I have options, like I'm building something." "That's exactly what you're doing. And Nick, I'm really proud of you for being open to help. That takes courage." As I carried my newly repaired bike up to my apartment, I thought about courage. I'd always thought courage meant doing everything alone, never showing weakness, never admitting you needed help. But maybe real courage was being vulnerable enough to let people care about you, being open enough to learn new things, being brave enough to imagine a different future than the one you'd planned. My phone had 3 missed calls from my mother, but I didn't feel the familiar guilt and anxiety. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, excited about tomorrow. I had a reliable bike, a new friend, a potential career path, and people who believed in me. For the first time in years, my life felt like it was moving forward instead of just surviving day to day. And the best part was, I was building it myself, with help from people who actually wanted to see me succeed. 3 weeks later, I was adjusting the brakes on a customer's bike at Downtown Bikes when my phone rang. It was my mother, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach when I saw her name. "I'll call you back in an hour," I told Marcus, who nodded and continued working on the wheel he was truing. I'd been coming to the shop 3 evenings a week, learning everything Marcus would teach me. Elena had recruited 4 other students from our business classes, and we'd formed an unofficial bike maintenance club. More importantly, I'd discovered that I had a real talent for mechanical work and problem solving. Marcus had already offered me a part-time position starting after Christmas, and I was seriously considering dropping down to just 1 day a week at the diner. I finished the brake adjustment and called my mother back from the quiet corner of the shop. "Nicole, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Your father and I are concerned. We haven't heard from you in weeks, and when we drove by your apartment yesterday, we saw you working on bicycles in the parking lot with some friends." I'd been teaching Elena and 2 other students how to change a tire. Mrs. Chen had brought us hot chocolate and had stayed to watch, asking questions about how everything worked. It had been one of the best afternoons I'd had in months. "I've been busy," I said simply. "Busy doing what? Playing with bikes?" "Nicole, this is exactly what we were worried about. You're getting distracted from your real goals. My real goals. For so long, I'd let them define what my goals should be. Get a 4-year degree, find an office job, live the life they thought I should want. But standing in that bike shop, surrounded by tools and problems I could actually solve, I realized I'd been chasing goals that had never been mine. Mom, I need to tell you something. I'm changing my major." "Changing your major? To what?" "I'm switching to the mechanical technology program with a focus on bicycle maintenance and small engine repair, and I'm going to start working part-time at a bike shop." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Nicole, that's not a career. That's a hobby." "It's not a hobby, Mom. It's a growing industry. Do you know how many people in Portland rely on bikes for transportation? How much money they spend on maintenance and repairs? And with electric bikes becoming more popular, the demand for skilled mechanics is increasing every year." "But what about your business degree?" "I'm keeping the business minor. I want to eventually open my own mobile bike repair service, maybe even a shop someday. The business classes will help with that." I heard my father's voice in the background, and then my mother was back. "Your father wants to know if this is because of some boy." I almost laughed. "No, Mom. This is because I found something I'm good at, something I enjoy, something that has real economic potential. I've spent the last 3 weeks learning skills that are actually marketable. Nicole, be realistic. You can't make a living fixing bicycles. The shop owner I'm learning from makes 6 figures a year. The mechanic who's been teaching me makes more per hour than most college graduates, and they love what they do." Another long pause. "We think you should come home for Thanksgiving so we can discuss this properly," my mother said finally. I looked around the bike shop, at Marcus patiently helping a customer understand why their gears were skipping, at the wall of tools that I was learning to use, at the bikes hanging from the ceiling like possibilities waiting to be explored. "I can't come home for Thanksgiving," I said. "I'm working. The shop is offering triple overtime for people willing to work Black Friday, and I need the money." "You're choosing work over family?" "I'm choosing to build the life I want instead of the life you want for me." The words came out more clearly than I'd expected, without anger or defensiveness, just simple truth. "Nicole, you're making a mistake. You're throwing away your potential." "No, Mom. I'm finally using my potential. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something I'm actually good at, something that makes me feel capable and useful and excited about the future." "And what about Jake? What is he going to think when he comes home for Thanksgiving and finds out his sister is working in a bike shop?" There it was, the real issue. Not my happiness or my potential or my future. What would Jake think? What would their friends think when they talked about their children? "Jake can think whatever he wants," I said. "His opinion doesn't pay my rent or determine my worth." I heard my father take the phone. "Nicole, you're being selfish and short-sighted. Your mother and I have invested a lot in your education, and—" "Dad, stop." The firmness in my own voice surprised me. "You haven't invested anything in my education. I've paid for every credit hour myself. I've worked 2 jobs to afford tuition while Jake gets everything handed to him. You don't get to call me selfish when you've never supported my choices or even bothered to understand what I'm trying to build. Don't you dare speak to me that way, young lady." "I'm not a young lady, Dad. I'm a 25-year-old woman who's been supporting herself for 6 years. And I'm done apologizing for not being the daughter you wanted." The shop had gone quiet around me. Marcus was pretending to focus on his work, but I could tell he was listening. Elena, who'd come in to learn how to adjust her seat height, was sitting very still. "If you continue down this path," my father said, his voice cold, "don't expect us to bail you out when it doesn't work." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said. "I've never expected you to bail me out. That's the whole point." I hung up before either of them could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Elena came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" Yeah, I said, and realized I meant it. I'm better than okay. Marcus looked up from his workbench. Family giving you grief about the career change? They think I'm throwing my life away. Are you? I looked around the shop again, at the bikes in various states of repair, at the satisfied customers who'd left with problems solved, at the community I'd found in this unexpected place. No, I said. I think I'm finally finding it. 2 months later, I was working 25 hours a week at Downtown Bikes and had cut back to 1 shift per week at the diner. My bank account was healthier than it had ever been, and I was loving my new classes. Elena and I had started a bike maintenance workshop for students at PCC, and we were already talking about expanding it to other campuses. My parents had stopped calling after I missed Jake's winter break visit home. Jake had texted me once to ask if I was really working in a bike shop, and when I said yes, he'd responded with a shrugging emoji and hadn't contacted me again. It should have hurt more than it did. But I was too busy building something new to mourn something I'd never really had. On a rainy Thursday evening in January, I was locking up the shop when Mrs. Chen appeared with an umbrella and a thermos of tea. "Nicole, dear, I brought you something warm for your ride home." "Mrs. Chen, you don't have to do that." "Of course I don't have to. I want to." She smiled. "Besides, I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. My granddaughter is visiting from Seattle, and I told her all about the young woman in my building who learned to fix bicycles and is starting her own business. She was very impressed. My own business. Marcus and I had been talking about me taking over some of the mobile repair calls, building up a client base for when I was ready to go fully independent. It still felt like a dream, but it was a dream that got more real every day. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That means a lot. You know, I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, and I've watched a lot of young people figure out their lives. The ones who do best aren't always the ones with the most advantages. They're the ones who learn to see opportunities where others see problems. As I rode my perfectly tuned bike home through the Portland drizzle, I thought about opportunities and problems. 6 months ago, my broken bike had felt like the end of the world. Now it was the beginning of everything I hadn't known I wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Just signed up 2 more people for next week's workshop. Also, did you see that job posting for the bike share program coordinator? Might be perfect for when you finish your degree." I smiled and pedaled a little faster. For the first time in my life, I had a future I was excited about, work that felt meaningful, and people who supported my dreams instead of dismissing them. I'd built my own road, and it was taking me exactly where I needed to go.